So what's been removed? All of the billboards, tram stops, bus stops, posters for fossil fuel related products and services have been banished.
How much does advertising influence what you buy? From May, Amsterdam in the Netherlands becomes the world's first capital city to take adverts for flights, petrol cars and gas heating off its streets. I'm Jordan Dunbar, and this week on The Climate Question from the BBC World Service, we're asking, does banning fossil fuel adverts work? With me to talk about this is Marco Silva. Marco is a senior journalist with BBC Verify, which is the BBC's fact-checking unit. Hello, Marco. How are you doing?
I'm very well, thank you.
Marco, we heard in 2024 that the UN Secretary-General Antonio Guterres called for every country to ban fossil fuel advertising in one of his speeches.
Many governments restrict or prohibit advertising for products that harm human health, like tobacco. Some are now doing the same with fossil fuels. I urge every country to ban advertising from fossil fuel companies. And I urge news media and tech companies to stop taking fossil fuel advertising. We must all deal also with the demand side. All of us can make a difference by embracing clean technologies, facing down fossil fuels in our own lives, and using our power as citizens to push for systemic change.
That was part of a wider speech that he made, but it had some really strong criticism of the fossil fuel industry. But it was just a speech. There was no plan for systems or laws put in place to actually ban it.
That's right. I mean, it's the UN Secretary General speaking. It's a speech that doesn't have any legal power. And of course, it doesn't mean that a law is being passed. It's a message, it's a call, it's an appeal for countries to take action. But it is important to say that right after he made that speech, there were figures within the industry, within the fossil fuel industry, within the advertising industry that didn't fully, I think it's fair to say, didn't fully agree with this speech, saying that actually the fossil fuel industry, for example, it's pulling its weight when it comes to reducing emissions. Likewise, the advertising industry, some important companies within the industry came out and said, well, we are helping our clients, whoever they may be, fossil fuel industry or not, we are helping our clients to convey the message, to convey messages around net zero. We are helping them explain their role in an energy transition. We are helping them communicate whatever effort that it is they are doing to play a part in that energy transition.
So they're saying that they are part of this transition away from fossil fuels themselves?
Correct.
Well, Antonio Guterres was talking for every country to ban fossil fuel advertising. A city that has already put a ban in place is The Hague in the Netherlands. How widespread is this campaign to ban the advertising now?
Well, we have seen different measures being adopted in different parts of the world. From memory, France is so far the only country that has adopted a national ban, but with some important limitations, including natural gas, which is not included in the ban, and I believe as well sponsorships of events. We know that Spain is also considering a similar ban nationwide that is currently going through Parliament. But more widely around the world, what we're seeing when it comes to these fossil fuel ad bans is mostly local action. Cities and councils in Sweden, in Italy, in Australia, and here in UK, Edinburgh and Sheffield as well, taking action and using whichever local laws or regulations to somehow limit how exposed their citizens are to fossil fuel advertising in public spaces. In the US, this is not necessarily a conversation that is happening so broadly, and that has to do, well, on the one hand, with the political culture, where the basic facts and the basic science of climate change is still, as we know, widely disputed by a large chunk of the population, but also because in the US there are legal protections within the Constitution, the US Constitution, the First Amendment, that because, again, of protections of free speech wouldn't allow the government to intervene and limit what adverts can or cannot say about fossil fuel.
Okay, as we've mentioned, the Netherlands is something of a front runner on this. There's already a ban in place in The Hague, and Amsterdam is about to go much further. So from the 1st of May, Amsterdam's ban will include adverts for meat as well as fossil fuels. Time to chat to BBC correspondent in The Hague and friend of the Climate Question, Anna Holligan. Hi, Anna.
Hello.
Okay, Anna, in The Hague, what has been removed? What has been banned? What has actually changed?
So what's been removed? All of the billboards, tram stops, bus stops, posters for fossil fuel related products and services have been banished. So no more ads for flights or cruise holidays, petrol, diesel, hybrid cars. All of these have been removed. So also things like fossil-based energy and gas contracts, you just simply don't see them anymore. And then in Amsterdam, they're doing the same, but they're taking it even further. So their adverts in those same spaces for all meat products are being banned. So no more big fat juicy burgers, chicken nuggets, or fancy new petrol cars. All of that has gone from the public spaces, but shops will still be able to advertise what they want. And there are various other caveats and workarounds in grey areas. So it doesn't mean you won't be seeing a burger when you walk down the street anymore in the Netherlands, but it does mean they will be much less visible from now on.
You've mentioned travel, car adverts as well as oil and gas. So it's quite a big scope.
Huge. And the really weird thing is you don't realize when these ads disappear until you see them elsewhere because you just kind of acclimatize. So absolutely, it's not just fuel going into a car. It's about flights. It's about anything that is polluting, anything that relies on fossil fuels as being part of its, main core business. You can still see small branding. So airline companies are still allowed to sell holidays or advertise holidays, just not the actual plane, not the flight, but they can still say, hey, here's a beautiful destination. Wouldn't you like to be there? They assume that you're going to fill in the gaps yourself.
Anna, in The Hague, where you are, there's already a ban in place. This has been running for a year?
It's been running for just over a year, yes. And I think the really interesting question with this is what impact will it actually have when those ads are moving from the public space that's visible from the street to our mobile devices that we're scrolling on every day? And obviously that is where this whole thing is moving. But it is about shifting not just a mindset, but what's in your vision directly confronting you every day, what's normalized. And the ban that's here in The Hague, it's a niche innovation that works like those early tobacco bans by stripping the fossil fuel ads from the bus stops, from the billboards. It achieves three things. So it questions the moral legitimacy of these products. It proves that legal barriers can be overcome. And then it sets this precedent, so a template or a blueprint for other cities and campaigners elsewhere in the world to follow. The question definitely isn't just, do billboards change behavior tomorrow? It's, are we as a society, our governments, local councils prepared to treat fossil fuels the way in which tobacco was treated decades ago, something that's just too harmful to be sold as an aspirational lifestyle choice?
And Anna, am I right in thinking that in The Hague, this decision to ban fossil fuel ads was challenged in court as well?
Yes, exactly. The travel sector said exactly that. These are legal holidays, they're legal flies, and they claimed that there was a free speech violation. The court knocked that back, said that commercial advertising isn't protected in the same way as political speech, and that cities are allowed to limit it to protect people's health and the climate. And the judge also said, and this is really interesting, that The Hague doesn't have to prove the ban will solve climate change, only that it's a proportionate step towards a legitimate aim. And so that ruling provided a backbone for Amsterdam's tougher ban and then a reference point for campaigners across Europe and beyond. So the Hague case kind of answered that free speech objection by essentially saying this is advertising, not democracy on trial.
The other thing to mention, I mean, it's been a year since the ban's in, but everything you've talked about, the billboards and so on, they're the physical world, but I get most of my advertisements online and on my phone. You can still advertise on there. So I'm wondering, after a year, I mean, do we know what results there have been? Sales of fossil fuels down, less holidays, anything?
Do you know, how are they even going to be able to make that link? I wonder, because obviously it's moving online and outdoor advertising is only a tiny slice of the global ad spend. Most money goes to TV, streaming, digital, and the city rules just don't touch those spaces. The campaigners in the Netherlands have been really honest and transparent about that. So they said the victory was real but limited. What's changed is who gets to own that public space and what we present as being normal on our streets. And the Dutch love this idea of normal. There's a saying here in the Netherlands, be normal because that's crazy enough. And I think that's one of the things. They just want to make it. I mean, I don't know what the alternative is now. We're seeing images of sweets and fizzy drinks. Some people would say that they're also pretty harmful. But the hard data on the sales and the attitudes, I think that will take time. The aim for the campaigners goes beyond that. It's to weaken the fossil halo, show that those legal barriers can be overcome and build the political confidence for the next frontier, which will probably involve the online marketplace.
Anna, thank you so much for talking to us today.
Thank you. It was a pleasure.
Marco, you normally work in the worlds of misinformation and disinformation. What was it about fossil fuel advertising bans that caught your interest?
Well, I spend a lot of time thinking about climate change, mis and disinformation, so false and misleading claims that are made around the subjects of climate change. I'm very interested in adverts specifically because, well, they're everywhere. And fossil fuel ads specifically, if you look around carefully enough, you'll see that they are everywhere, be it in sponsorships of sports teams that you might see, be it in exhibitions in museums close to you that might be sponsored by fossil fuel companies, be it in adverts that you might see on TV, on streaming services, as you're scrolling down your social media feed. They do pop up everywhere. And because they are everywhere, some campaigners, there are those who see that as an issue, as a barrier, as a problem to fighting climate change. Because, of course, if these adverts are everywhere and are normalizing the presence of fossil fuels in our lives, then perhaps this could pose a challenge when it comes to walking away from fossil fuels to effectively fight climate change.
And that is similar to smoking, because smoking and the tobacco industry used to be advertised everywhere, and it was seen, TV and film, all the coolest characters smoked. Yeah. That no longer happens.
Think
in most
about
of the
James
world.
Bond, right?
Yeah, who no longer smokes.
Yeah.
But the difference is smoking and tobacco, it's an addictive, if pleasurable and harmful vice. Nobody has to smoke, whereas fossil fuels are currently vital to our economies and everyday life. So where do the similarities start and end?
This is a very interesting parallel because you'll find, if you do the job that I do, sort of covering climate change and mis and disinformation, you'll find people who either love this parallel and stick by it and people who absolutely loathe it. And I'll tell you why. So there is a case to compare what advertising of fossil fuel products with advertising of tobacco products, because some campaigners say consuming fossil fuel products also has a detrimental impact on people's health. There was a study from Harvard from 2021 that they did with a couple of British universities where they looked at the impact on premature deaths of burning fossil fuels. And they found out that in 2018, 1 in every 5 premature deaths worldwide could be linked to the burning of fossil fuels. And what this study then highlights is that there is a clear physical impact on people's health. Burning fossil fuels produces pollution that has impacts on our health, whether it is through heart conditions, respiratory conditions, or whatnot. And that's even before we take into account other consequences in indirect effects of climate change, for the insecurity effects of extreme weather events. But again, there are also those who argue that while you can draw that parallel, like you said, fossil fuels are still a fundamental part of the running of our day-to-day lives. There are many parts of our lives where at the moment, it's still not quite possible to completely
There's no alternatives.
replace. Exactly.
And so therefore there isn't a choice. The places we've talked about are all in the developed world. They're countries, that have the economies and the money to provide alternatives. Because some critics have said banning fossil fuel adverts it's a distraction from actually setting up the alternatives that we need to move away from fossil fuels. So more renewables, electric vehicles, better public transport.
Yeah, I've followed this debate very closely, and I've seen many accusations being leveled at the people who support these bans, saying, well, this is really the politics of virtue signaling. This is symbolic politics. This doesn't actually have any tangible impact. These bans do not cover all forms of advertising. You may have stopped the adverts from appearing on billboards, but like Anna said, you haven't stopped them from appearing on my social media feed, where these days I get most of the adverts that I see anyway. All these initiatives that we are seeing around the world, they are relatively recent initiatives. So in regards to fossil fuel advertising specifically, we don't quite have the data to say conclusively that this has a massive impact. But it would be a legitimate question to ask, if it didn't work, would fossil fuel companies be spending millions and millions of dollars in advertising? And finally, I would say as well, supporters would argue that this is a starting point. Right? This is about not necessarily limiting purchasing options right now, that perhaps the impact on sales of fossil fuel products aren't going to have an impact immediately if we ban ads, but perhaps in the long term, in terms of building consuming behaviors through generations, perhaps that's where the big action, the big change is in the long term. And as well, they're not saying that the people who support these initiatives, they're not saying just ban fossil fuel ads and that will solve anything. No, they say you have to do this alongside all the other policies and take all the other actions that are necessary to tackle climate change.
Some advertising companies themselves have stopped taking on fossil fuel companies' clients, haven't they? How big a movement is that within the advertising industry?
So there are a couple of organizations around the world that have formed with precisely this idea of showing the advertising industry is not fully backing the fossil fuel industry. There are some of us who are, in their words, uncomfortable with taking paid work from fossil fuel companies. One such movement is called Clean Creatives. I believe that at the moment they have more than 1,000 advertising agencies that have joined their pledge to refuse work from fossil fuel companies. These agencies are scattered all around the world, not just in the global north, but also in the global south, in countries like Vietnam, South Africa, Ecuador. And the idea for them is that by signaling we're not going to take work from you, they are perhaps starting again a ripple effect, like we mentioned earlier, a ripple effect across the industry where more and more people will say, hang on, perhaps I shouldn't be taking advertising work. But again, despite their movement having, despite the fact that their movement is building some momentum, there are still many companies around the world that do take paid work from fossil fuel companies.
Well, money's important in this because as well as us being reliant in many countries for fossil fuels, that money means that certain companies, take a bus company or a TV company or a football team, they'll have been reliant on the money from that advertising.
Yeah,
and giving that up and replacing it, that could be difficult.
That is such an important point, because if you think about, and this is a very lively debate happening here in the UK, where you have cultural institutions, museums, whatnot, that might take sponsorships from fossil fuel companies, and their exhibitions might be about climate change related subjects. They will defend their work and say, well, we're not giving any fossil fuel company the right to interfere with the content of the exhibition, but without their sponsorship, we would not have been able to organize this exhibition, which of course then poses a dilemma. And, listeners will have very different views on this. There will be those who say, well, you should not take the money in the first place, whatever the cost, even if that means you're not going to have the money to organize the exhibition that, raises awareness on the issue. And there are those who will say, well, actually, if the content of the exhibition is not problematic, then why shouldn't you? And these companies aren't doing anything illegal. They are providing a product that we all still need in our lives, products that are deeply ingrained in our economies. And again, they are not doing anything illegal. So why shouldn't they be allowed to share the profits of their work with cultural institutions, for example?
Marco, most of our conversation's been about consumers. It's about demand side, me seeing adverts and buying things. But there's an argument that a lot of advertisements by the fossil fuel industry, they're not aimed at me. They're aimed at politicians. They're aimed at the more powerful people.
That's true. It's fair to say that they are aimed at both, right? But when it comes to politicians and decision makers, there is anecdotal evidence to suggest that generally around COP climate summits, there is an increase in fossil fuel advertising that you'll see on social media. In the last COP that happened in Brazil, there is research by the Climate Action Against Disinformation group that shows there was a very sharp increase as we got closer and closer to the COP climate summit. There was a very sharp increase in adverts being placed on Google by fossil fuel companies. And again, you might ask the question there, but why is it the climate summits are about discussing the energy transition, are about discussing how to tackle climate change? So what is the agenda here? And you could argue, like many campaigners argue, that this is about owning the conversation or shaping, influencing the conversation. Likewise, there was a debate a couple of months ago here in the UK. A fossil fuel ad ban was discussed, and one MP, Labour MP Jacob Collier, he said, and this is a very stark quote, "Fossil fuel ads appear in Westminster Station." Westminster, for the benefit of our listeners, is where the Houses of Parliament are.
So the politicians have to go through there to get to work. The
heart of the political establishment here in the UK. Fossil fuel ads appear in Westminster Station, for example, not because consumers need urgent advice about offshore drilling, but because that's where the policy makers walk.
Marco, thank you very much.
Thank you for having me.
And thank you for watching. And don't forget, you can subscribe to the BBC World Service YouTube channel so you don't miss a thing. And if you have a climate question that you'd like us to answer, you can add it in the comments below. I'm Jordan Dunbar. I'll see you next time.